Hello, bonjour and welcome to your new Bonheur Private Wine video. Today I wanted to discuss an aspect of wine that is probably not as glamorous as some others and that most wine professionals don't really talk about often. And I guess it's pretty much the same with all agricultural products and all food products in particular. You don't often hear explained why and what pesticides are used for and how much of them are left in your product, right? But wine is usually seen as a natural product, which it is overall, but you sometimes hear about pesticides in viticulture, or you hear the term organic or sustainable viticulture for certain wines but not others. But do you know what it all means? Let's just have a factual look at why pesticides, insecticides and other fungicides are useful in viticulture and how it impacts, more importantly, our wine. Let's go! My fellow wine-loving friends, Julian here. Before we get started with the video, there is something that you have to know about. This video was made possible by the Bonheur Private Wine Partnership, and the reason I work with them is not just because it's been called the most unique wine club in America, but because they truly love the wines that they choose for you. Founded by Will Bonheur, the partnership is a small group of wine lovers who have come together to import excellent small batch wines that might otherwise get completely overlooked by large importers. They get them. Right now you can get your hands on 3 rare extreme altitude red wines from Argentina, from some of the purest, highest vineyards in the entire world, way up in the Andes Mountains. No middlemen, no additive packed supermarket wines here, no inflated cost. Plus you'll get exclusive access to more wine education videos from me, just like the one you're about to watch, to make sure you become an educated wine connoisseur. So make sure to check out the link in the video description to see if you want to become partner in something truly special in the world of wine. But for now, back to your video. Viticulture, which is of course, as you know, the name given to the activity of growing grapevines. Viticulture is agriculture, of course. It's growing and cropping grapes essentially. Simply, it's growing fruit. As you know, every plant, every agricultural product has pests, insects and fungi mainly, that like to feed on certain plants, and they tend to like fruits like we do because they are sweet and juicy and delicious, so they like to eat them grapes. So growing grapes in nature, like it does for growing any fruit, takes some precautions and some spraying, unfortunately with pesticides and things. However, 2 things to have in mind that are quite specific to viticulture. Number 1, often, not always, but often or sometimes, grapevines are grown in rather dry regions, the majority of times. It's one of the wonders of grapevines, and this is in part why the ancient Romans loved them so much. Grapevines grow well even in very dry conditions. So even in a relatively arid climate like it is, especially now in California these days, or like it's always been in Italy, Spain, or here in the south of France. Oh, by the way, no coincidence there, all of those are wine countries, yes? You can still crop in those dry conditions some delicious and sweet fruits that you can make wine out of. No need to be in the rainforest of Brazil. The good thing about this is that pests don't like dry conditions very much. Fungi don't grow well without humidity, as we know. Insects get really thirsty very quickly and they don't like it, and so on. But point number 2 of the things to have in mind about viticulture specifically is that grapevines have 2 major pests that are really annoying, that everyone in the world of wine knows. And they are very specific to the grapevine species. Those are called mildew and powdery mildew. Similar names, but 2 different fungi. Interestingly, what happens there is that during the middle of the 19th century, these 2 fungi were brought back to Europe from the American continent. American species of vines that had lived there forever didn't mind those 2 pests because they had evolved to resist them. They were pests, so the plant developed systems to fight them, and so on and so on. Co-evolution, it's called. This happened in America. But European vines that had not seen those pests had never seen those bugs before. So all of those delicious European grapes that we love, that are so great to make wine, the Cabernet, the Chardonnay, the Pinot Noir, well, they get badly attacked by these mildew fungi because they had never seen it before and they haven't had time to adapt. And that's really, really bad. It was especially bad in the mid-19th century when it first arrived. Vineyards of Europe back then were virtually entirely decimated, especially because there was a third pest, a bug this time, that attacked and pretty much ate the root systems of the vines entirely. That's before we find ways to get around these problems by first grafting European vines onto American species of vines, or what we call American rootstock. Yes, you have to know that pretty much all vines in the world, even though the species as you see them outside in vineyards might be French or European, the Cabernet, the Pinot Noir, etc., the rootstock, the roots of the vines, are of indigenous American species. So America ruined European viticulture, but it eventually came to the rescue to save it all as well. So we're all fine. And then for fighting the fungi, well, we found products to spray on the vines to protect them. But this all means that a fair amount of pesticides must be applied to grow healthy grapes that we can use to make our delicious wine. It is a rather demanding crop in that regard because it's a fruit. You get a similar problem with apples, as you know. It takes quite a lot of spraying. As a quick reference, when I was studying viticulture some 20 odd years ago, we used to learn that in France, even though viticulture represented about 10% of the land used for agriculture in the country, I think it was around 10% or so, viticulture used to use about half of all pesticides used for all agricultural products in the country. And we grow wheat, we grow all sorts of things, of course, as you know, in France. But 10% of the land, 50% of the pesticides were used for viticulture specifically. Making all of this French wine that we used to make back then used to require a lot of pesticides. But things have changed, certainly. Yes, it used to be after World War II that grape growers, it's true at least in Europe, and I'm pretty sure it was somewhat similar in the US and the rest of the world, although the US probably wasn't making that much wine, as much wine back then as it is now. Anyhow, growers in the 50s, 60s, 70s and 80s used to spray vineyards a lot. They had a valuable crop, making them a little bit of money, so they would make sure to spend this money on pesticides to protect it. But now, and especially over the past 20 years or so, things have completely shifted around. New regulations, yes, we have a fair bit of those in Europe, plus the whole debate and conscience of the necessity to protect the bees, our waters, and the environment in general has meant that growers are a lot more careful nowadays. They understand how to use less pesticides, which is very important, the knowledge, the science, but to use them better. We also have more efficient products as well, and things like that have evolved. It's also been understood that if you leave some weeds and grass in and around the vineyards, you get a better natural balance of the environment, with natural predators as well that you can sort of cultivate, and yes, sort of a natural protective balance of the vines in their more natural habitat. Growers also have understood that this money that they used to spend on pesticides, well, they're better off not making it in the first place with a slightly lower yielding crop, but much healthier and respectful vineyards, less productivity but better product and less expenses buying pesticides as well. They also know that this is what modern consumers want or prefer. So it's all happening, it's all happened. And it's all very, very encouraging, I find. Vineyards used to look very dry and lifeless, except for the vines themselves. They was green, but just the vines were green. Everything else was very dry. But now you go through the vineyards, especially during the spring, and they're all green and luscious and lively and full of life. And it's beautiful to see. Now, what we will see next time with our next video is that the side effect of using less pesticides as well in the vineyard has actually led to making better wine, especially over the past 20 years. So it's actually all coming together nicely, and it's great to witness. It'll be a fascinating aspect to talk about next week as well. We'll talk about more about organic and sustainable viticulture that I mentioned before and what it actually means. We'll also talk about what I'm sure some of you are wondering about after watching this, which is how much of these pesticides are actually left in your glass of wine. That's going to be very interesting, and there's some good news on that front as well. But let's leave it here for today. It's probably enough information for one single video. Stay tuned to our newsletter and video series for the next episode, where we'll discuss this a bit deeper, and I'll be looking forward to this, and I'll be looking forward to seeing you around in the wonderful world of wine. Cheers. Hasta luego. Au revoir.